Sveiki, Žygi, kaip laikotės? Čia bus pirmas mūsų šių metų aptarimas dviese ir nors yra tik 26 metų, šiandieną 9 diena, tik 9 dienos praėjo ir jau pasaulis toks jausmas, ne tai, kad griūna, bet stipriai keičiasi ir audros jau siūbuoja mūsų vargšą laivelį. Tai pradėkime nuo to, kas įvyko Venesuelą. Žygi, ir iš jūsų perspektyvos, kaip atrodo dabar ta situacija, ne tik Pietų Amerikoje, bet visam laisvam pasauliu?
Na, kaip kažkada juokavau, Putinas ir tai rytų diktatoriai mėgsta kalėdų laiką, mėgsta vasarą karams, o pažiūrėjau, Amerika mėgsta tas pirmasias sausio dienas. Kažkada labai panašių laikų buvo nuimtas Panamos diktatorius, panašiai ir Granada ten invazija buvo ir matyt, tos sausio dienos yra toks ritmas, reikės priprast, kad negali po naujųjų metų atsipalaiduot, bet įsijungt CNN ir laukti dar kažkokio naujo karo. O šiaip iš tiesų Seimas gan tuščias, bet tie, kas dirba su užsienio politika ir saugumu, sukasi aplinkui, nes įvykiai veja įvykius. Aš pats ruošiuosi vizitų į Ameriką visą savaitę kartu su vokiečiais, lenkais, ukrainiečiais, suomiais, švedais. Pradžiai būsim Vašingtone, vėliau Čikagoj, susitiksim su tavo draugais ir pažįstamais, lenkų, ukrainiečių, lietuvių, žydų bendruomenių vadais, bandysim užvesti jų milijonus už tolesnės kovas už Ukrainą, nes jos nesibaigė. Kaip matom, Trumpas ima persekioti rusiškus laivus, kyla gandai, kad gal net tos Grehemo sankcijos pajudės į priekį. Man tas patinka, čia toks reiganiškas žingsnis. Na, ir tiesiog užbaigsiu, o kitą ranką ruošiu kelionę milžinišką į Ukrainą, jau virš 40 žmonių, parlamentarų, važiuosime, kaip visą laiką invazijos dieną, vasario 24, būt su ukrainiečiais, broliais ir seserimis, tarsimės, kaip toliau vis dėlto judėti į Ukrainos narystę ir narystę Europos Sąjungoje ir NATO ir, aišku, į pergalę mūsų sąlygom, o ne rusų.
Na, Žygi, kaip ir likusis pasaulis, jūs tikrai nerandat laiko pailsėti. Bet grįžkime trumpam prie Venesuelos. Ką mes iš tiesų pamatėme? Mano akimis tai iš vienos pusės labai sėkminga, kiek ten buvo, 30 minučių ir 3 valandų operacija. Įskrido Amerikos pajėgos, keli malūnsparniai ir iš esmės tiesiog susiėmė Maduro ir jo žmoną. Bet kokios yra dabar pasekmės? Man atrodo, kad bent jau toks jausmas, kad patys amerikiečiai, bent jau administracija, pilnai nėra susiplanavę, ką jie darys. Mes labai norėtume ir, aišku, mūsų kolegos venesueliečiai, diaspora ir tuo pačiu ir lietuviai iš Venesuelos labai norėtų matyti demokratišką Venesuelą, kur Machado ir visas demokratinis judėjimas perimtų valdžią ir atstatytų tą tikrąją Venesuelą, bet kol kas ar mes tai matome. Kol kas man atrodo, kad bent jau iš išorės žiūrint, atrodo, kad tiesiog Trumpo administracija nori tarti su tais, kas liko iš Maduro režimo, kad gauti savo finansinę naudą. Ar aš klystu, ar...
Na, aš pasakysiu taip, nemažai lietuvių sureagavo taip 50-50. Kai kam nepatiko, kad tarptautinė teisė sulaužyta, bet aš bandau taip pakankamai kritiškai ir objektyviai įvertinti. Palaukit, jūs kalbate apie tarptautinę teisę. Ar jūs atsimenat, kai Jungtinių tautų saugumo taryba 19 metais buvo keliamas balsavimas, akivaizdžiai buvo vogiami rinkimai, buvo 2 prezidentai šalyje, parlamentas siūlė surengti dar vienus pakartotinius rinkimus, bet ne. Kinija ir Rusija saugumo taryboje blokavo tos rinkimus ir įvedė faktiškai savo šalių tolesnę diktatūrą. Aš prisimenu Rubio žodžius, faktiškai čia kalba ne tik ir ne tiek apie Venesuelos laisvę nuo diktatoriaus, bet laisvę nuo Kubos diktatūros. Nes 19 metais Kubos saugumo pajėgos, kurios ir faktiškai saugumiečiai, kurie ir buvo iššaudyti aplink Maduro, rusų 2 kariniai laivai su Wagneriu garantavo fizinę apsaugą, o kiniečiai su savo pinigėliais garantavo, kad ta šalis liks kišenėje blogio ašies. Jinai faktiškai penėjo visą blogio ašį savo tą sunkiąją naftą. Tai mano akimis, nors tie formalistai kalba apie tarptautinės teisės pažeidimą, jie kažkodėl nekalba, kad ta šalis buvo perimta blogio ašies, kad jinai pažeidžiant visas tarptautinės ir kitas normas, aš nekalbu apie žmonių valią, kuri buvo išreikšta, bet jinai buvo paniekinta. Tiek Machado, tiek ten daug tų ir Guaido, ir visokių ten tų pavadinimų, jie visi nušluoti į šalį ir kartu su narkotikų pinigais, ir dar nepaminėjau Irano ajatolų, nes Hezbollah buvo visą ten centrą savo narkotikų įsirengusi. Na, ar čia yra tarptautinė teisė atiduoti žudikams, kriminalams, autokratams valstybę, ir ne vieną, jų yra daugiau. Tai man tai buvo pergalė, tik tai, vėl atsakant į antrą pusę tavo klausimo, na, supraskim, iš tikrųjų gyvatė iki galva buvo nukirsta. Dar gyvatės kūnas šiaip juda viduj. Kariuomenė, milžiniška, džiunglės, kalnai, 20 milijonų gyventojų. Tai jeigu amerikiečiai nenori antro Vietnamo, tai jiems reikia, na, faktiškai spaudimų dėrėti su valdžia. Net pažiūrėkim istoriją, kai Jeruzdelskis jau griuvo sovietinė Lenkija, nes Gorbačiovas neturėjo pinigų, reiškia, niekaip ten išlaikyti. Jeruzdelskis buvo pereinamojų laikotarpiu tuo prezidentu kokius metus. Ir tada, kai jau visą šalį perėmė demokratija po rinkimų, na, jisai atsistatydino, atsitraukė, bet meteliai praėjo Lenkijoje. Tai aš manau, jeigu gerai suprantu, tai ką ir Rubio šneka, tai vat ir kongresmenas, kurį tuoj kalbinsim, nes jie nuolat pabrėžia, jie mėgsta tą Machado, čia yra super, reikia demokratijos. Aš manau, kol kas bandoma išvesti šalį be kraujo, spaudžiant kariuomenę į kažkokį dylą, kuris leistų demokratijai ateiti tą šalį, leistų pakeisti sąlygas, ir galbūt netgi pratęsti tas revoliucijas Kuboj, nes tai, kad Kubos saugumiečiai nesugebėjo apsaugoti Venesuelos diktatorius, rodo, kad Kubos žvalgyba tapo silpnutėlė. Anksčiau jinai garsėjo, kaip ir rusai, viskuo, bet tai gal ir režimas gali ten sujudėti, nes ir naftos nebebėra iš Venesuelos. Tai aš vis dėlto tikiu, kad tas taip nemėgstamas šitų autokratų ir panašių nemuno aušrų deep state Amerikoje suveiks ir pasikasęs po visų šitų komuniagų pamatais juos išvers. Aš tuo tikiu, jaučiu ir viliuosi.
Ir šiaip kelis, manau, labai svarbius elementus palėtėte. Pirma, šiaip kalbant apie šitą blogio ašies bendrą veikimą ir kad iš tiesų Venesuela buvo pagrindinė, sakykime, kuro stotelė, degalinė visai blogio ašiai, ypač Kinijai, kuri savo naftos ir dujų beveik neturi. Ir jau mačiau, kad buvo sustabdyti visi naftos tranzitai ir gabenimai ir plukdymai į pačią Kiniją. Bet dėl to, kalbant apie tai, kad Kuba nesugebėjo apsaugoti Venesuelos režimo, ne tik Kuba, bet ir rusiškos raketos, kurios turėjo ginti dangus ir iš esmės apsaugoti pačią Venesuelą, kad negalėtų nusileisti tie patys malūnsparniai ar lėktuvai ir panašiai. Matėme visišką fiasko, kad Venesuelos tariami sąjungininkai nesugebėjo apginti režimą. Tai kas čia įvyko? Ar čia buvo tai, kad Rusija ir Iranas tuo pačiu nebėra pajėgus apginti režimo, ar čia yra iš tiesų, kai kas gali manyti, kad tas susitarimas tarp Rusijos ir Amerikos iš tiesų įvyko, kur yra pasidalinamas pasaulis į įtakos zonas, kur, gerai, tebūnie atitenka Amerikai Venesuela, bet Rusijai kas atitenka jau Europą.
Ar čia manau, Rusijai nieks netitenka, jokia Europa, nes tai, ką mes stebim ir tai, ką tu teisingai vardijai, vyksta Rusijos imperijos tolesnis žlugimas dabar dar pasaulinėme teatre. Pažiūrėk, maži dalykai, Kaukazas, armėnai, tu galvoji, jie taip lengvai judėtų į Europą, jeigu rusų galia nebūtų sumažėjus. Apie Armėniją padarysim dar vieną pokalbį vėliau, nes šiais metais jiems rimti rinkimai laukia. Sirija, Asadas laikėsi 300 000 kariuomenės su rusų ginklais, su kariniu baisiu naikinančiu, kaip čečėnus ir ukrainiečius, kad naikino, šplavė civilius objektus, susitraukė kariuomenį iki 800 000, be jokio palaikymo, faktiškai turėjo sudėti ginklus. Irano žlugimas, kuris vyksta prieš mūsų akis, padarysim kitus pokalbius apie Iraną, tikėkime spėsim, kad režimas nesužlugs iki to mūsų tinklalaidės naujos, bet akivaizdu, Rusija neturi jokių jėgų palaikyti Iraną. Irano imperija ir Rusų imperija jau sugriuvo artimuosiuose rytuose, Hezbollah, Libane, Hamasas ir pats Iranas sužlugdytas. Ir nėra iš ko pagalbos prašyti. Kai juos šplavė Izraelio ir Amerikos aviacijos, kur buvo tie rusų prieš lėktuviniai daiktai, kurie nesuveikė ir Venesueloje, tai aš sakyčiau, Rusijos imperija traukėsi, griūna ir jos vietas užima arba Amerika, arba Kinija. Ir tai, kad dabar gavusi Venesuelos naftą, Amerika realiai savo rankose sukaupė beveik 50% pasaulio naftos, aš manau, mums yra gerai. Nes čia pasirinkimas, Venesuela iš vis 17% naftos pasaulio turėjo savo žemės, aišku, panaudoja tik 1%. Ar tai, kad tie resursai būtų mūsų žudikų pusiai, ar vis dar Amerikos pusiai, manau, tai yra gerai. Žinoma, mes turime ir toliau, Vincentai, viską daryti, kad Amerika būtų mūsų pusiai. Kol kas tik tai tą ir darome, visus metus ir čia kalbėdami ir darydami viską, kad tik tai išlaikyti. Ir aš tikiuosi, kad mums tai pavyks. Bet kokiu atveju tai nėra mūsų priešų rankose. Ir tai yra labai gerai.
Labai viliuos, kad iš tiesų taip yra. Ir ta nata, kad mes bandome palaikyti Amerikos buvimą mūsų gretose, pristatysiu mūsų šiandienos podcast'o svečią, su kurio paskalbėsime antroje dalyje. Tai yra kongresmenas Matio Díaz-Balart. Jau teko su juo kalbėtis per šį podcast'ą prieš jau beveik metus, man rodos. Tai linkiu mūsų klausytojams gero klausimo ir ačiū Jums labai, Žygi, už labai įdomų pokalbį.
Tik vienas dar žodis apie Matio, primenant, kad tai yra turbūt artimiausias valstybės sekretoriui Rubio draugas kongrese, tai yra, galima sakyti, biudžeto komiteto lietuviškai šnekant pavaduotojas, kuris valdo visas užsienio operacijas, taip pat net ir ambasados Vilniuje finansavimą. Jo dėka Vilniuje išliko ir Tarptautinis Respublikonų institutas, nors visur kitur ofisus uždarė. Tai yra senas mūsų draugas, bet kartu Kubos kilmės Amerikos kongresmenas, kuriam tikrai ne tas pats, ar ateis demokratija į Venesuelą ir Kubą. Tai apie tai ir pakalbėsim.
So, to all our listeners, today we have once again, a second time within the last year, the absolute privilege and honor to speak with the wonderful Congressman Matio Díaz-Balart, currently a congressman in the United States House of Representatives. And today we'd like to speak to you, Congressman, about the situation in Venezuela. If that's quite all right with you. So, Zhigi, if you could take the first question to save the dear Congressman's time.
I will make it very blunt. Most of the people killed around Maduro were Cuban agents. Do you think, Mario, that our old dream to make Cuba free might happen if, we, stand together against this axis of evil that American president is trying to defeat in Latin America first, and then maybe in our region as well. But do you think, the hope of your family of well, late Lincoln, our brother, might be realized?
To both of you, first, thank you for this opportunity. I apologize for my voice. I'm I have this horrible cold that is going around the United States, and it's a pretty strong one. So I apologize if I cough, etc. To both of you, what a pleasure. And to Ziggy's, look, you're one of the people that I most admire ever, period. And so it's a privilege to be with you. What we saw was a couple of really remarkable. What we witnessed was pretty remarkable, right? In a number of different ways. Number one, it proved to the world that the United States military is by far the most dynamic, the most just perfect, powerful military in the world. This operation was done without the loss of one American or one vehicle, one aircraft, and it was in a place, by the way, that was protected. It was a military base, the most fortified place in Venezuela, where they, by the way, had the latest Russian and Chinese technology. And as you said, Maduro's security was all Cuban. It was all Cuban, including some very high-level people, a very well-known colonel of Cuban intelligence and military. And so at first it just showed the capability of the United States military, which is beyond what the rest of the world can even comprehend, number one. Number two, it showed the resolve of President Trump and the Trump administration. This is not an administration that's willing to just accept status quo. You saw that in his first administration with how he dealt with ISIS, how he dealt with Soleimani, how he dealt with Baghdadi, and you saw that with how he, finally just capped and eliminated the Iran nuclear program again, and also a masterful military strike. And then now the world saw this, right? So it's right now what you have in the United States is not only the capability, but also the willingness to use it wisely and at the right time. This is a president who has helped stop 8 wars or 7 wars, but it's also the president who struck the terrorist in Nigeria. And, so he uses military force when he deems that it has to be used. And that's important for the world to see. What the second thing that the world saw, or the third thing I should say, is the fact that what Ziggy, you've been saying, what I've been saying, while what so many of us have been saying that has been denied by the Cuban regime and others and their apologists, is that this Maduro cartel was in essence being propped up and protected by the Cuban regime. And the Cuban regime that has been denying that consistently denying that there's any Cuban military or intelligence presence in Venezuela has now publicly admitted that over 30 Cuban people have died, right? Soldiers, etc., died, including, as I mentioned, some high-level intelligence and military people. The situation in Cuba, that regime has never been this weak, Ziggy. It's never been this weak. It's teetering. There's no electricity for the people. And remember that the oil that the Venezuelan regime or the Venezuelan cartel has been sending to Cuba has not been used by the Cuban regime to provide electricity. They've been reselling it to provide them with wealth, the elite in that regime, wealth, because they travel the world in private planes, driving sports cars, shopping in Rome and in Paris. While the Cuban people have nothing, including, by the way, electricity. But that's now drying up. And I think you're going to see that regime collapsed within this Trump term. The Venezuelan situation, by the way, is not over. That cartel is still there. The head of that cartel is gone. I will tell you that they are now doing anything and everything that President Trump is asking them. It's literally an amazing thing to watch. Now, we all know that they're just scared. They don't want what happened to Maduro to happen to them, or as the president had said, or worse. Because if you think about it, Maduro was pretty lucky. You know, he was pretty fortunate. There could have been a different alternative to how he was taken out. So they're scared, but I also understand, and we should all understand, that they're still there. And they're going to try to do whatever they think they need to do to stay in power, to stay in control, which is why I'm very pleased with what I'm seeing from the president and from the Secretary of State, which they're saying status quo is not acceptable. This is a transition period. And if that transition period doesn't continue, and you have to stabilize the situation so you can have a transition, right? If that doesn't continue, the president has been very clear that the U.S. military is available, is ready to go, and the president is willing to use it if he deems that the case. I think the Cuban regime will not survive the 3 years of President Trump. I actually don't think that then the dictatorship in Nicaragua survives. Aziz, think about this. Look at what's going on in Iran. And look at the attitude of President Trump and this administration versus when Obama was in the White House and when Biden was in the White House. When the Iranians hit the street massively during the Obama administration, the then vice president, which was Biden, publicly said, it's okay, we're going to continue to deal with the regime. We're going to, in that day, it was the president, the fake president de jure was Ahmadinejad. Remember him? And who was not the president, it was still the mullahs, right? It was still the Ayatollah. But I remember then Vice President Biden said, oh no, we're going to continue to deal with with him and with the regime. What this president has said publicly is, if I see that the Iranian regime gets out of hand here, the United States military will protect the Iranian people. That's what leadership looks like. And that's why you're seeing, I think, the world changing. And I think in this term, there's a very strong chance that in the Western Hemisphere, we're back to democracies and these Marxist, socialist, murderous dictatorships are gone. And that we see a change in even in Iran. And I also think that, God willing, you're going to see sanity and peace return to Europe.
Indeed. Congressman, if I may just jump back to something that you said about Venezuela, it's very interesting. You mentioned that this is a transition period, as it were. So I have several questions. I'll just launch them at you if you don't mind. I know you're short on time. But transition to what? Because for the time being, what it looks, or sorry, forgive me, maybe I'm not too well versed in this, but it seems that the main negotiations are happening, as you said, with the remainders of the Maduro regime, right? So I was wondering, is this a transition to democracy, which is what we'd all like to see? We'd like to see Machado, be able to, in a sense, take the reins and to rebuild Venezuela as a democratic society, or as some people are saying, is it really a transition to a Venezuela that would be, in a sense, more docile, more willing to listen to the U.S. in terms of business interests, or are we really going to build a free and democratic Venezuela and eventually seeing the same thing happen in Cuba?
No, that's a very good question, and let me answer it as clearly as I can. The president has been very explicit that status quo, that this narco cartel cannot be in control of Venezuela. There's no misunderstanding as to who these people are. Now, I've seen criticism around the world, and really less around the world, but in the United States from the radical left, which is frankly, unfortunately, the left now, saying first they criticize President Trump for taking out the head of this cartel, and then they criticize him for not taking everybody out, which is the irony of ironies. the administration is very clear that this is a narco cartel that cannot be in control of Venezuela. But the reason that you have these conversations is because who's there? They are, right? And so there are no negotiations necessary with the opposition that I would call the majority, because they're not in control, and they have the majority of the population, but of the support, but they're not in control. So the transition is not through them. The transition is through the people who are in control, that this president and the administration have said cannot be in control of that country. He's been very clear about that. There are even bounties on the heads of a lot of these members of the so-called government. It's not a government in Venezuela. It's a narco cartel that has taken over a country using force and terror. So now, one point. Second point is this. The fact that the president is stating and has stated publicly that there are American companies who have been, their property has been expropriated, has been stolen illegally by the Venezuelan cartel, of course the United States is concerned about that. You better believe it. And you know, the concept that the president shouldn't be concerned about that is frankly pretty absurd. Private property is one of the pillars of the United States and of what the United States stands for, and private property rights. So that has to be restored. There also have, but let's not get confused. The overall goal and the solution for Venezuela is not to keep that cartel in control, because they can today give property back or release some political prisoners, and tomorrow reverse themselves, right? No, the goal and the solution is for Venezuela to become return to normality, and normality is very simple. Venezuela is a country that has a long democratic, with a small d, tradition of free elections, and that's got to be the goal. And the goal is that can't happen in 3 years. That's got to happen relatively soon. But so far, those that are still kind of in control, the cartel members, I will tell you, are in essence not only following what President Trump is asking them to do, they're basically taking orders from President Trump. While they do that, as long as they continue on this process of security, you're going to have to free all the political prisoners, not all of them. They've freed some of them, but not as many as they need to. They have to free all the political prisoners. There's got to be some stability, and the goal has to be free elections. And by the way, the decision as to who's going to be the democratically elected president, the next one of Venezuela, it's got to be the Venezuelan people under free elections. I have a pretty good idea who that is. I think it's going to be Maria Corina Machado, who's one of the most impressive leaders I have ever met.
Mario, I know you have to run, so this is my last question, like a farewell with you. What do you think? Lithuania did a lot with last government to get rid of Chinese dependencies, enjoy Indo-Pacific together with you. That was right. But now I think with this crusade against communist, corrupted, narco, authoritarian regimes in Latin America, maybe this is the way to get us even closer. Because as a country, as Lithuania, we never ratified anything that supports Cuban regime. You saw how we voted in United Nations. Some of them even stood with you 100%. Some of our region abstained. Maybe this is the way to get our freedom-fighting region even closer to America, when America is fighting its freedom fight in Latin America. What do you think?
Absolutely. I've always been particularly indebted and grateful to Lithuania. And by the way, a lot of that is your leadership, my friend. And then we have some other freedom fighters, like Emanuelis Zingeris, who's a brother and a freedom. And there's so many of our heroes that are in Lithuania, starting with you. That is, I have that picture in my office as well, my friend. Absolutely. Look, the United States and this administration is focusing on Western Hemisphere in the right way. one of the things, by the way, let me just give you a little bit of news that not a lot of people know. I chaired the subcommittee of appropriations, the money committee, that decides the funding on the House side. Then we have to negotiate with the Senate, the funding for everything having to do with foreign policy. We just finalized those negotiations with the Senate. We're done. We have a bill, and God willing, next week that bill will come to the floor, and we pass it, and we send it to the president for his signature. Among the things in that bill is explicit directions to the Secretary of State that the votes in the United Nations will have a direct impact to the attitude of the United States on when it comes to foreign policy and foreign aid. And the day of acceptance of, playing games with the enemies of freedom and the enemies of the United States are over. They're over with this administration, and obviously I'm doing my part in Congress, and we're going to see that. And yes, Lithuania has been on the forefront. Lithuania has been a model in every way, not only in your attitude towards other enslaved countries, but also in your attitude vis-a-vis Russia. How you have been not only standing up your defenses, putting funding to defend yourself, to defend Ukraine, way above and beyond what I would say can be expected of you, of Lithuania. And yes, this attitude that most of Europe still has, Western Europe, because you look at Estonia, Lithuania, Poland, the attitude towards this issue is a lot different than it is in Western Europe, right? Those days have to be over. And I think the world is realizing that, President Trump, he's a very interesting individual. He says things. And it's important. I've always told people he's very transparent. I don't know if you all have seen when he has the press in the Oval Office every day. He doesn't do press conferences. He has the press there, and they can ask him about anything. And he has conversations, and a lot of those conversations are thoughts that he has. But the one consistent thing about him is his resolve, his unwillingness to accept, just treating the enemies of freedom as if they were their allies, and the attitude that Western Europe has had for years, vis-a-vis Cuba, for example, is just not acceptable. And so there's a big difference as to how I perceive Europe as a whole. Strong allies. Let's be very clear. But there's a very big difference as to how I perceive Europe and European countries between Western Europe and particular countries like Lithuania. And yes, that relationship is going to get tighter, is going to get stronger. I commend President. I know that there are differences and people are concerned about President Trump's approach to the war in Europe. President Trump is trying to stop it. That's what he's trying to do. And so he's looking at different approaches how to stop it. You saw that he pressures where he thinks he needs to pressure. And right now it's very clear he's not very happy with Putin. And the one thing that Putin needs to understand is that President Trump has a lot of patience until he doesn't. And when he doesn't, then you are potentially going to run into a very dangerous situation. And so, but there's a big difference between how all of us perceive Europe and how we perceive some of our strongest allies in Europe. And I would say Lithuania has been on the forefront, has been the clearest, the bravest, the most transparent. And please know that we note that. I understand it. My colleagues in Congress understand it. And clearly the administration understands it.
Thank you, Mario. You need to go. Your chief of staff is writing to me. So see you soon in DC. See you, my brother. Thank you for everything you do for Lithuania. Goodbye.
Thank you very much, Speaker. Apologize for my voice.
No, it was great. Thank you, Mario. Goodbye.